Hello, my name is Tiberiu Buta, and I'm a member of the first violin section in the Halle Orchestra. The Halle Orchestra is named after its founder, Charles Halle, or as his name was at birth, Karl Halle. He was born in Hagen, a small town in Germany, and he grew up almost permanently surrounded by music, his father being a professional musician and his mother a keen amateur. The young Karl's musical talent was obvious from very early on, and while his parents encouraged him to learn music, the piano in particular, they were very determined that he should have a well-rounded education. When he was 9, his father took him to see Spohr, who was regarded by many at the time as even greater than Beethoven, to ask his opinion on the little boy. Spohr was so impressed that he asked Karl to play at a concert a couple of weeks later. At the age of 11, Karl began playing in the second violin section of his father's seasonal orchestra. It was an orchestra put together every year for about 2 months to accompany performances of opera, drama and comedy with a touring company of singers and actors. Only a year later, at the age of 12, Karl found himself as an emergency substitute for his father, who became ill, and ended up conducting various concerts in his place, including performances of The Magic Flute, Don Giovanni and Freischütz. When he was 17, he went to study music further, first in Darmstadt, then in Paris. He gradually really embraced life in Paris and adapted to it perfectly. He called Paris the center of civilization, and in a way it really was exactly that. So many of the leading artists happened to be there at the time. Chopin, Liszt, Berlioz, Wagner, Cherubini, Halévy, Ingres, Delacroix, Dumas, Balzac, Georges Sand, Heine, and others. And Halle soon became friends with all of them, really. But the thing that made a huge impression on him in Paris from the very beginning was hearing Chopin play the piano. And this is what he wrote afterwards. I sat entranced with wonderment. The marvelous charm, the poetry and originality, perfect freedom and absolute lucidity of Chopin's playing at that time cannot be described. It was perfection in every sense, each time revealing new beauties until I could have dropped on my knees to worship him. It was only the next day that I began to realize what was before me, how much study and hard work to get technical command over the keyboard. Soon after, he heard Liszt, and again he wrote, a feeling of utter dejection, such marvels of executive power and skill I have never imagined. Chopin carries you into a dreamland in which you would like to dream forever. Liszt was all sunshine and splendor, subduing his hearers with a power none could withstand. For him, there were no difficulties of execution, the most incredible seeming child's play under his fingers. He was never harsh, never thumped. What surprised Karl was that much of the public of Paris was not familiar with the Beethoven piano sonatas. Even Chopin, for example, had only heard a single Beethoven piano sonata on one occasion. And he asked Karl to play it for him again because on that occasion he didn't like it. In fact, soon Karl ended up playing Beethoven sonatas and concertos all over Paris, the same way he would later in London, where the public was equally unfamiliar with them. Another important friendship which developed during Halle's time in Paris was that with Berlioz. Berlioz, not being a pianist, visited Halle and his friend Heller, asking them to play through his compositions. Halle, on the other hand, was deeply impressed with Berlioz's skills, knowledge and imagination, both as a composer and as a conductor. He went on to perform and champion much of Berlioz's music throughout his entire life. Once, after a performance of Faust with the Halle Orchestra, he confessed that even though any successful performance and warm reception to a piece is reason enough for happiness and satisfaction, it felt even more so when the music was that of Berlioz. In Paris, Karl also met Richard Wagner, who was 6 years older than him. Like Berlioz, Wagner would also visit frequently Halle and Heller to hear them play piano duets, often to hear them play arrangements of orchestral music. At the time, Wagner was really struggling financially, earning his living mostly from making arrangements of a variety of music he didn't particularly like for Schlesinger, was then the publisher of the most important musical paper in France, Gazette Musicale. Halle and Halle liked Wagner because he was, Halle says, full of enthusiasm for all that is beautiful in art. But they had no real idea of his abilities, since Wagner was not a good pianist and they couldn't hear any of his music. The first time they heard Wagner's music was at the performance of his overture Christoph Colomb, which was a disaster, and Halle judged it to be the music of a madman. However, later, when Halle and Halle heard about the success of Wagner's opera Rienzi, and upon going through the entire score together, they decided the success was in fact justified. Halle met Wagner a number of times throughout the years. The last time was when was the premiere of The Ring at Bayreuth, around that time. Halle wrote with disappointment, though, that Wagner was no longer the modest composer he remembered. He wrote, "What a difference between the man of 1839 and 1876. Halle would, however, give many performances of Wagner's music with the Halle Orchestra in Manchester. On a tour to Germany in 1842, Halle also met Mendelssohn, and he later wrote, "The few weeks spent there in the intimacy of Mendelssohn and Hiller were amongst the most precious, the most interesting I have ever lived, and are engraved in my memory with a point of gold." Now, we could continue to go through the many important meetings and musicians he collaborated with during his time in Paris. However, there simply is not enough time in this one video, and it's just getting longer and longer. So, the point I wanted to make was that these years were extremely important for Karl Halle's development as a musician, and by now he was known and appreciated in the highest musical circles. In 1843, Halle made the first visit to England at the invitation of an English friend and took part in a few concerts. However, he returned quite disappointed with the cold reception and was determined not to go back. In general, Karl Halle's career in Paris was going better and better. He felt now financially secure and even decided to get married. One could safely assume that perhaps he would have spent the rest of his life there if it wasn't for the emotional and financial impact of the 1848 revolution. Fearing for his safety and that of his family, he decided to leave the city he loved and, as he wrote, a society which I had good reason to think was unequaled in the world, and despite his previous reservations, decided to start a new life in London. By now, though, his fame preceded him, and he didn't have to struggle much to find engagements. On his arrival, Karl changed his name to Charles. Some believe he added the accent on the final letter of his surname so that people in England wouldn't pronounce it Hall. However, that is not quite true, as he had already used many times that spelling in France, and it was in fact a way to make his name seem more French for Paris. We'll go over the next period in Halle's life in another video. For now, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.